Okay, we are live. What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to the RGT podcast. Unfortunately, it might just be yours truly today, but hey, I'm not really, fronting that whatsoever. We have an awesome guest for you guys today. We have a former PlayStation developer here, and I'm definitely looking forward to this conversation. A lot of good questions I have to ask him, and hopefully you guys enjoyed the show. Make sure you hit that like button if you haven't done so already, and go ahead and share it out. And let's definitely get into the show. Shout out to everybody in the chat. Shout out to David Gaines, new channel member. Everybody else, I see you guys. What's up, Jack? Mr. Mega, we got Ice Queen, Overdone, Chris, Kevin. I see you all. Good to see you all. Now, let me go ahead and introduce this individual here. We're anxiously ready to get this conversation. Guys, this right here, I bring you Chris Grannell. Chris Grannell is a former PlayStation developer. He's worked on a few games, including Killzone, F1, and Wipeout. Mr. Grannell, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Obviously, we've been talking about doing this for a couple of weeks now, so yeah.
Oh yeah.
Great to finally get on, and yeah, looking forward to the show.
Yeah, how long we were scheduling this for? Like 3 weeks, I feel like.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, then life and work and other things get in the way, but no,
Absolutely.
glad to be here finally.
Oh yeah, well, thank you so much for coming on. It's great to finally, see you in person and talk about this stuff. Now, I already kind of filled you in a little bit, how we're gonna go about this. So, just a few questions about PlayStation. I know you and Sony has some history, so I want to ask you, what actually got you into the industry as a whole?
So go way back. I think when I was in kind of high school, or coming towards the end of kind of high school, there used to be this kind of music entertainment shop in Liverpool, and it was called HMV. And it was this huge store. It was across like two floors, and it used to have this kind of big PlayStation gaming setup downstairs. And I think when Sony or when Psygnosis released the first Wipeout, there was a bunch of like game developers and designers basically showcasing the game in kind of like early form within HMV. And I remember going in with my brother, and then we started chatting to the guys, and then had a little go in this kind of like kind of preview format in the middle of a shop, as you can imagine. And it was just the first conversations, and if you go back to them, game developers, designers, and stuff had this kind of rock star status, and it was this kind of they were driving around in sports cars, and it was this kind of cool. It was this cool industry to be in, and I think ever since that kind of day and chatting to the guys, I wanted to get into game development at that point. And then fast forward a couple of years later, I applied for a job originally as a tester, really, because in the early Psygnosis days, it was kind of really a quick way in was to kind of get into QA testing. And at the time, I was kind of building PCs and things. So really early on, when it was quite, it wasn't the norm for people to be building PCs at home. And I got a job, yeah. I originally got a job as a tech tester, so building PC rigs. And at that time, Psygnosis was still doing like Destruction Derby and Crazy Ivan and all these kind of old games. But they'd literally just been acquired a few months before that by Sony.
Okay. So is that what you usually, is that where you're gaming on mostly now, is the PC? Or are you still primarily on the consoles?
Yeah, so a mix really. So on PC, I'm kind of into sim racing, so I don't mind the likes of kind of iRacing and, project cars and stuff with a wheel setup. And then I've got kind of a lot of friends and family on, Xbox consoles, but obviously play PlayStation. I've got Switch. So I like to have a varied gaming setup, really.
Okay. Well, I gotta ask, man. As a game designer, if I was to ask, if somebody in the chat was to ask me, what would it like? What would be the route to go to become a game designer? What would you say? What would be the proper
So I think, I think it's a tricky one to become kind of a game designer or principal designer or someone in the sense that you sit there and you kind of coming up with an idea, or you're kind of leading a project from that regards. I think it's much easier to kind of move into that position once you're part of the dev team. And I think personally, I actually had this question. So someone messaged me yesterday or today and said they wanted to get into game design. Where do we start? And I always say kind of start to learn the tools. So start to learn Unreal Engine or Unity or any of these kind of tools, and just build up a portfolio yourself, because there's kind of two ways of getting into development. They'll either go down the route and they'll want people with like degrees and English degrees and all of these kind of things that you wouldn't necessarily think that gaming companies, but they can afford to be a little bit picky. Or you can build up a really good portfolio, and I'm not necessarily saying you need to go and design levels and this, that, the other, but if you prove you've got competence in the tools, so just scenes, so Unreal, for example, build some scenes, maybe woods or a snow scene, or just something that you're interested in, and just show that you've got competence to kind of light that, to fill it up, texture it, so on and so forth, and just build a portfolio that way. And then I think the easiest kind of entry would be like level design then, so you can move in, show that you've got competency of the tools, and and
then you just work your way up from there, basically.
Yeah, a lot of development studios would jump at the chance of getting decent level designers. So you see a lot of kind of modders and things like that move into the industry because they're really talented, not because they've released 10 AAA titles or something. It's skill, really.
Okay, all right, good. What would be your most fun memory working with PlayStation?
So my whole kind of career with PlayStation was a really enjoyable one. So it was a big portion of my life. I kind of went to Paris. I worked in Amsterdam with Guerrilla Games. Worked with a lot of great talent at Studio Liverpool. And obviously we were connected with London and Cambridge Studio and so on and so forth.
Right.
So it was just working with. It was kind of working with the team that all had this kind of common goal. Very talented team. You were kind of working on concepts and at the cutting edge of hardware. So being a first party studio, you're obviously kind of there on the front line whenever new hardware is released. So there was good camaraderie within Sony. It was a great company to work for. We had, Sony used to put on these kind of annual kind of summer trips. So the whole studios, so they put on kind of like chartered planes, and we'd fly out to kind of Spain or Malta or various countries, and then there'd be a big conference about what we're trying to achieve and what we've done.
Yeah.
And that was great, because obviously that was one of the best ways to kind of meet developers from other studios within the Sony family, really.
Networking, pretty much. Bringing y'all together. Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, it was great.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Now, I mean, you worked on Killzone. What was it, 2? I believe you said Killzone 2.
Yeah, Killzone 2. Yeah.
Wipeout. Now you've seen Killzone 2 on the old gen consoles and everything, and now you see where we are with the PS5 and Series X. They have SSDs. I mean, just how big of a leap? Like, how do you feel about this leap in like power and just efficiency with consoles now? I mean, granted, the narrative was, oh, you'll never be able to get what you're getting on PC on a box, on a console, right? Because that was a big thing. Because especially with PS3 and 360, the PCs really went ahead. But right now, we're getting on the par performance, about on the par. How do you feel about the whole situation there? Do you think game development is a lot better? Would you say?
Yeah, so I think it's easier. So I think we're in our kind of biggest generational leap. So I think the CPU is huge, and obviously the SSD is huge, because we're moving from kind of mechanical hard drives, and we all know how kind of slow they are. So I think if you look at something like Ratchet and Clank, I think there's a real reason why that's being developed on PS5 and next generation console. You've got, I think it would be, I'm not saying that type of game could not be done on PC or another console, but that kind of the warping and having that kind of instant loading of an instantly loading of like a new version of a scene and things like that would just be really difficult to do on a mechanical hard drive. So that's probably why we're not seeing it on PS4 or PS4 Pro.
Some people actually believe that can be done on PS4, and even I said, like, it's just that's showing you the leap, you know, from 4 to 5 is the SSDs and how fast things load in. I broke this down streaming like videos, like how many like assets PS5 can pretty much stream. Yeah. That's like the biggest thing it does, and you know, a lot of people really believe now, especially with the whole thing with cross-gen, they believe some of these games can be, you know, on PS4, like Returnal or the Ratchet and Clank mindset.
Yeah, so the kind of tricky thing is where I think a lot of people kind of get, you know, het up about or get confused about is, so you could create a you know, the new Ratchet and Clank on a PS4 Pro or something, but it's gonna have lower fidelity. I think it's gonna be a very big question mark of whether you can do that kind of instant time warp, and I think it would be very difficult. It would be almost impossible to get the instantaneous warp that we're seeing on the gameplay videos. So I think there's been a conscious decision by the development team to say, let's make this next gen only. And this is me kind of ignoring ray tracing and stuff. So ray tracing and all those elements are just making Ratchet and Clank look even better. But that kind of gameplay element, that smooth instant warping, becomes a lot easier for those guys and girls at the studio to do on an SSD drive. And obviously, you know, the new kind of I/O and so on and so forth, you kind of removing that bottleneck of the mechanical drive on the old consoles. And I think that's why that's specifically PS5 only. I think when you start looking at kind of Horizon and God of War and things like that, you know, these are largely games that would have started their life cycle on a PS4 on last gen hardware. And I think what they're obviously doing is making that then run and work on a PS5. So I think that's why So I think that's why those are, you know, still kind of, you know, cross-gen in terms of the PlayStation platform, because they started life, you know, years and years ago on PlayStation 4 hardware.
What's your stance on the whole cross-gen thing? I know a lot of people believe that we need strictly these games to only be on PS5 to showcase, you know what I'm saying, like to show all the bells and whistles of PS5. But when you've seen Horizon from Guerrilla Games, I mean, it's like you're getting the bells and whistles, you know, and a lot of people really think that, oh, it needs to be strictly on that platform for you to really see the best out of it. But honestly, I'm kind of in a different thinking pattern here at this point, because it doesn't really look like it needs to be anywhere. It literally, they're pushing it out the gate. Like, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, so I think I'm not overly, Joe. I'm not as kind of crazy as. So I think you've got the kind of, you know, genuine, you know, gamer who either games on a platform of their choice or games on multiple platforms. And then, unfortunately, you know, on Xbox, on PC, on PlayStation, we have the kind of fanatical gamer who, you know, sometimes there's a question mark of whether those guys are actually playing games on any of those platforms or whether they're using it for kind of clout. And for me, I want more people to kind of experience games. Now, I agree with the likes of Ratchet and Clank, or if a studio has made a informed decision to target next generation hardware only because they want to push the boundary. I think that's fine, but I think these people who have kind of thrown the toys out the pram and have got this kind of issue because we're now having some of these games on cross-gen. I always say, well, look at what kind of Horizon Zero Dawn was like. Look what The Last of Us was like. Look at what, you know, Uncharted's like on the kind of old hardware. And no one at the time ever said that they look like terrible games. In fact, they look like some of the best games we've seen, God of War, etc. So
Detroit still holds up ridiculously well. We've been spoiled by PS4 if you think about it. Detroit looks amazing. God of War PS4 looks amazing. Horizon, I mean,
Insomniac stuff with Spider-Man. You know,
absolutely, Spider-Man. Yeah, that's true.
So I think a lot of people kind of forget pretty quickly, you know, how blown away we were by kind of previous games, and there's a reason why there's kind of remastering, or there's a reason why people are trying to, you know, revisit these games at 60 FPS and so on and so forth. So I'm someone who's not hugely offended. So that the issue I've got, it's not an issue as in I've got an issue with Sony and we're falling out and stuff like that. We were talking just before we went on air.
Right.
I think Sony need to trust that their customers are kind of grown up and adult enough and sensible enough to kind of appreciate and understand if they were to turn around and say, listen, it's early in the generation, we're going to support our, multiple generations because we've got 160 million users over here, and we've got kind of 8 or 9 million users here.
Yeah, I said that. Yeah, like, and that's typical. Every generation they do this. Like Sony's known for pushing the last gen while they're pushing the new one. They always support in some capacity. They'll make sure third-party games are on that platform. This is the same thing, and I think they said there was like a initiative, right? It was like they're going to support it for 2 years, 2 to 3 years, like that, from Jim Ryan. So yeah, I agree. I agree that they definitely need to be more transparent. The thing is, though, and I think you see it on Twitter. You're on Twitter, so you see how people react when you're a little too transparent. Some people.
Yeah, I mean, it's and I think that's the kind of balance that you have to have. And I think Sony have always been a traditional company in the sense that they like to keep the cards close to the chest. When Sony were working on kind of like Vita and PSP and all of these kind of handheld consoles, they were petrified of what like Apple were doing on iPhone and stuff like that. And we were like, this is never going to be a handheld console. It's a phone which is going to support kind of mobile games. It's a very specific game type, and you see these kind of like Gardenscapes and Zynga games and Golfing with Friends and all of these kind of mobile games, but they're not a patch on anything that kind of Sony or Nintendo are doing on a truly kind of handheld console. So Sony have always been very kind of traditional and want to kind of keep the cards close to the chest because they think someone will try and copy it, or they don't want kind of that stuff getting out there. But I think we've moved into it, and that was my time. So I'm talking about 9 or 10 years ago when I moved away from Sony.
Up till, though they're always known as like the counter hitter. I always call Sony that. Like they wait for everybody to go first and then go, hey, this is what we're going to do. So yeah, I understand that completely. Yeah.
But I think the gaming society, I think gaming, the gamers and society, if we want to kind of be, a bit deeper, we've moved on now. So we've got kind of social media, we've got all of these outlets which allow people to be in the moment, give in the moment news, give in the moment updates. So it's not like, a decade ago where you had to wait for, or a decade and a half ago when you had to wait for a magazine to be released each month, and all of this stuff where it was kind of a big splash and it was traditional press and you had to do a lot of hard work, and that's where you'd kind of find your news. We can be given this news. Yeah. So we can be given this news now on a regular basis, and I think gamers understand and appreciate that. So I think the transparency, is not a bad thing. I don't suddenly think Xbox or Nintendo are going to say, "Oh, well, Sony are doing cross generation," so because everyone seems to move along in their own kind of plan anyway.
Mm-hmm. It's the weird part about it too. You said going back to the whole magazine and everything, keeping everything close to the chest. It seems like everything doesn't matter what platform, right? Everything's getting leaked. So it's like there's like benefits to it, and there's insane drawbacks about it. Like I remember back when the PS4 first launched, when we first saw the hardware design, right? The design was actually leaked the day of the show. And a lot of people were like, wow, it looks like an eraser. I don't know if you remember that. Everybody was down. So yeah, there are drawbacks to keeping things close to the chest.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, we kind of, we're in a spoiler generation now, aren't we? Where I think people want to I think it's one thing kind of leaking snippets and stuff like that. But I think if you take Battlefield 6, for example, that trailer's been doing the rounds now with the stupid face stuck over it and stuff. And it's kind of like, personally, I'm someone who likes to kind of feel and see the reveal with other people, let's experience kind of reveals together. Let's talk about it and so on and so forth. And then sometimes you just get like random, social media accounts are leaking some huge news, and it's kind of
yeah, like the Last of Us 2 debacle. Remember
yeah,
that?
and it's
Oh,
just
Lord.
kind of it's like what's going on. So I get there's a bit of like, let's try and keep things close to our chest
Right.
for like E3 and events and stuff like that. But I think people are kind of sensible enough now to not be offended. See, there was no way that if Sony came out and said, we're going to support, multi-generations for the next year or so, there's no way in the world that the PS5 would not have sold out like it has done anyway, because there's early adopters, there's enthusiasts, there's people who want the hardware on day one,
Yeah.
and it's selling like it's selling like hotcakes. It's selling faster than PS4 sold in the same time period. So I don't think it was. It's almost kind of like a bit of a naive move to say, well, we'll say we believe in generations, get everyone to kind of buy
After
new hardware
you
because
committed. Yeah, that's true. I
and
agree
then
with that,
and then
man.
we'll let rip. And I think there's been a bit of a narrative about, well, because of the hardware constraints, then Sony have obviously kind of flipped and decided to like support last gen. That's pretty pretty much nonsense. You can't, if you're kind of 4 years into a development cycle and you've been targeting PS5, for example, or there's no way you're suddenly going to turn around and go, oh, with 10 months to go, we'll support previous gen or something like that, because you started off on previous gen hardware anyway, and you're trying to obviously work towards making it work on next gen.
I saw some weird comments about it too. Yeah, I mean to cut you off.
Yeah. No, it's fine. I just think it was just a bit of a bad move for Jim and Co to come out and say it almost would have been better if he'd not said we believe in generations, and almost kind of didn't really talk about it. So we're going to release this and we'll let you know in the future and stuff. I think that would have been a better message than we absolutely believe in this route.
Right.
So you need to buy this console to play God of War and this, that, the other, and then quickly backtrack and go, now you can get GT and you'll get all these games. So I think it's just mixed message for the fans. It's not going to do them any harm. I know there's a few kind of press sites and stuff. They're flip-flopping and they're kind of going against what they've said and stuff.
Yeah.
None of that really harms. It doesn't harm PlayStation. It's such a big brand in the gaming community that it's a bit of let's get some. There's some good articles about it and some reasons, but it's not going to do. It's certainly not going to do PlayStation any harm. So they may as well be in control of the message rather than allow people to kind of run with it. That's what I think.
Do you think somebody else needs to handle the PR type of thing? Like, how Jim Ryan's kind of been making the announcement. Do you think Herman Holtz should really do this? Maybe.
Yeah, I
handle it
mean,
a little better?
yeah. I mean, Sony and Masters are kind of PR. So they know exactly how to reveal. They know exactly how to do a vertical slice. And they've always been great at that. I think for me, I worked under Herman when I went over to Guerrilla Games. I've got huge respect for Herman. I think he's a great entrepreneur. He's got great history in building that studio before it was kind of Sony owned, and obviously moving it into a Sony internal studio. So I think Herman's got the kind of the charisma and the positioning to be much more of a front, much more of a front for PlayStation. Mm-hmm. And I haven't got anything against Jim Ryan, but Jim Ryan is a numbers person. He's someone who has been tasked with the job of how do we make more money, as PlayStation as a brand, how do we make more money? And that's why we're seeing games come to PC and so on and so forth, because it's an untapped market of millions and millions of players who may not necessarily have a PlayStation, but want to experience things like Days Gone or Horizon or some of these great products that and rumored to be Uncharted and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I always kind of looked at it as like a booster in a sense. Like they'll put this game on PC to get more eyes on on the sequel, not necessarily on that game, but on the sequel. If that makes sense. Like if I like the Foundation, I gotta get that sequel. I gotta get that PS5, and go get it. That's what I thought they were going to do. And the same thing too. It's like, I don't know. It's like I just see more happening. Like I don't know about day and dates. That's the big fear a lot of people have, but I do see it happening. You remember like they used to do it in a 4-year gap, 4 to 5 year gap for each game, or something like that.
Yeah.
I think it might be shorter than that. They might cut it shorter than a lot of people think for some.
Yeah, and I think you may see it depends on which way they want to go. So I think if Sony sit down and say, actually, by a PC gamer is like a real staunch fanatical PC gamer. I don't mean a fanboy or anything, but I mean someone who's really absolutely loves PC gaming, doesn't want to play on console, doesn't want to play in front of the TV. If Sony sit down and say that type of gamer is not going to take a sale away from PlayStation 5 or PlayStation console,
right, that's the narrative,
then I think they will be happy to kind of release it close to console launch, or within. I don't think they'll worry too much about it being a year or two or something like that. I think the narrative will change, and you'll start to see games come to PC a bit sooner. But that's what they've got to sit down and feel comfortable with, that someone who sits on a gaming rig, day in, day out, doesn't care about Switch or any kind of console, PlayStation, Xbox, you name it. If it's going to give us another sale, and it's not going to take a sale away from PlayStation consoles, then they'll be okay with it, because Jim will have been tasked with making PlayStation more profitable. And that is, they're never going to turn around and say, okay, well, let's put PlayStation games on Xbox. So that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So where does he look? So he looks at, okay, we can put PlayStation games on Stadia, but we know where Stadia is going. So he turns around and says, we put PlayStation games on PC, and there's a huge untapped market, and you won't have to see the Days Gone sales on Steam. Top of the charts.
Yeah, they're doing really good.
Yeah, a fantastic version of the game. So, and it's a version of the game that doesn't detract or make the PlayStation console version look bad. So it's not suddenly, it's kind of like potato mode on console. And, next gen, you've never seen it.
So I knew what you're talking about. Yeah, I was riding the bike, and it ran like, I don't know if it had happened to you. You ride the bike, and it feels like a slideshow. The frames would drop. I had that type of issue. Enemies would do like the little wiggle. I don't know what it's called, that little glitch wiggle effect when you shoot them sometimes. It's like, it was weird. So, I understand. Yeah, that's part of the thing.
So as long as they tick all those boxes and go, it doesn't make the console version look bad. And I think I don't think gamers haven't really got an issue. If someone on consoles running it at kind of like ultra wide screen setting and this, that, the other. So most console gamers are not used to, what does a crazy ratio game look like?
Yeah.
They
a lot of people were
tend to be
confused by the
PC
FOV
gamers.
slider when I was playing.
Yeah.
Like, what's an FOV slider? I'm like, oh, if only you knew when I turned it up.
Yeah, exactly. So it doesn't detract away from the console game, and I think that time period the PC release will shorten, because it's more money in PlayStation's pockets, and in turn it's more money reinvested back into games, which is not a bad thing.
This is I don't know if you would be able to answer this, but I guess if I was to have an estimate, right, what would be a good sales number you think that Sony will look at and be like, yeah, this warrants a sequel? Just out of curiosity.
God, it's been a while. So I don't think they when I was there, they didn't really used to focus on kind of sales numbers. So they used to focus on Metascore. So I know Metacritic.
I do remember.
So I know Metascore is can be quite a controversial subject, because I think there's a fundamental part of Metacritic which is broken, and I think that's the user score, which allows people to just like review bomb anything.
Yeah.
So you've got kind of Xbox fanboys reviewing a review bomb of PlayStation games. You've got PlayStation fanboys, and you've got PC review bomb and this, that, the other. So I think the user scores are kind of take with a pinch of salt. Don't really look at them, and it's not even just exclusively for fanboys. It can be a developer as made a questionable decision, and then you see a game get review bombed, or they've released DLC but they've charged for it, or something like that. So
Devil May Cry 4, remember they changed his hair, and everybody's like, oh, this game is the worst game ever. I'm like, it don't look that bad, and I played a little bit. It's not that bad. It's just he doesn't look like Dante.
Yeah, so it's crazy. So when I was at Sony, we used to look at a Metacritic of 70 or above to then warrant what was deemed as it's been successfully received. it warrants us looking at kind of a sequel and so on and so forth. Over the years, unfortunately, that's kind of, well, fortunately and unfortunately. So I'm one of these people who think, a 70 out, a 7 out of 10 or a 70 can still be a good game. So you look at Days Gone, hovered in the 70 regions and so on and so forth.
Order
so these can still,
yeah.
So these can still be great games or good games, enjoyable games. Gaming is subjective. So I could absolutely hate a game, but it could be your most favorite game of all time. So, for example, I'm not a huge fan of like JRPGs or Final Fantasy or something. I appreciate what they are, and I appreciate they've got a fan base, and I understand why.
Yeah,
but it's just not my type of game. But I don't go around and preach to people that they shouldn't play it and so on and so forth. So I would be absolutely the wrong person to review a JRPG or be involved in the development of that type of game, because I feel I wouldn't be able to give the fan base what they want from that type of game. So I could review a JRPG low because I don't get it, I don't understand it, for many different reasons. And it could be someone's game of the year. So I'm someone who thinks, a 70 or above is still, that's a decent, it's a game I play and so on and so forth.
Right.
I think what Sony did over the years, and this isn't just Sony, I think a lot of developers or publishers did, is they started to push that meta target up. Yeah. So they started going, it'll be 75, it'll be 80, and it'll be... And for me, I think it's quite... I think for anyone to say, we'll think about a sequel if a game gets an 85 plus Metacritic, because it's very difficult for a game to get...
So you wouldn't say
85
the sales figures matter that much for that? Would you?
No. So obviously the sales figures are, are a bonus or a benefit because money is being made. But you could have a 60 game and it could be the only game that's available for a hardware launch. So its attach rate is almost like a 1-to-1 with every console sold.
Wow, you open
but but it doesn't mean it's a great game. It's just being in the right place at the right time, for example. So I think they look at kind of Metascore, they look at kind of critical acclaim.
Right,
I think these things, because critical acclaim and decent Metascores tend to bring good sales anyway, so they go kind of hand in hand. I'm sure there's someone in Sony.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's someone, there's someone is sat at Sony saying, what they want to do is they want to break even. So they want to at least break even and say we've spent,
200 million,
5 million quid.
Right.
Yeah, we've paid 5 million quid on this game or whatever. Or we've paid, $1 billion on this game if you're a Call of Duty or, whatever it may be. We want to get that back. At least get that back, and then we want to see where the profit is. But if it comes with critical acclaim, then don't forget there's loot boxes, there's kind of, other ways of making money within those products.
Right.
So it doesn't necessarily just have to be kind of the box sale or the the download sale, because if you take something like Rainbow Six Siege, give that away for free.
They're doing
and
that,
people are just rinsing the money off loot boxes, etc. So I think there's a bit of a combination, but I think critical acclaim is really important, and I think Days Gone is the perfect example of that, because it's almost like a cult classic for people, but it obviously hasn't done enough to warrant a sequel. But obviously the Bend Studios are still working on a new IP, so it's not done anything that's detrimentally damaged Bend.
Yeah,
it's prevented Days Gone from getting a sequel because it wasn't received with critical acclaim. If that was
that's true. It's like interview, first impression or everything, and that's exactly yeah. I agree with that. Yeah, because Bend, Bend's gonna bounce back. I really do think they're gonna bounce back, because the first that was their first AAA game, Days Gone, and so I can understand pressure for sure. I think they'll definitely bounce back, but you can't help but ask yourself, what if what if it did good and we had that sequel? What if it did? Like Killer Instinct. I'm still waiting for Killer Instinct too.
Yeah. And you could see, like, in an ironic twist of fate, you could see a Days Gone sequel happen further down the line because it's been so well received on PC now. So, it became kind of a cult classic for some on PlayStation console. They've kind of given it a life cycle on PC, and it's actually been really well received. So, Sony will look at that now and say, actually, across the gaming community, across console and PC, this game has actually been received really well now, and it's got legs now, and people are enjoying it. And it could have been some bugs, or it could have been some performance issues, which once fixed, people are enjoying it. So it could make a comeback. They may just have parked it, for this new IP.
Okay. I don't know if you remember PlayStation AllStars, right? Where like everybody was like, "Oh my God, where's Crash Bandicoot? Where's the Spyro?" And then we get those later. Do you think Sony needs to go? Has to go back and go and get some of their old mascots and bring those back to us in general? Let's say Parappa the Rapper, just to throw him out there, or Jack and Daxter, or there's so many characters that Sony has, and it's kind of like Nintendo, right? They have like a loot chest of characters that they can definitely go in there and grab, like Sly Cooper, for example. That's another one. But you don't really see those. You see more of the newer characters being pushed. Do you think they need to bring those back at all? Would you want to see them?
So I think I think some of those are kind of cult characters and cult brands. And it was I was speaking to someone fairly recently who was saying they'd love to see kind of Jack and Daxter and kind of like older icons. And I think there's obviously a gaming generation who've not experienced those games, so you've got an element of introducing those to some kind of older characters. But you've also got people who kind of love those games, so you've got a mixture of people who kind of remember them and want to see a bit of a reboot and so on and so forth. It's a tricky one, really, because I think we're caught in the middle of the certain people are tired of kind of reboots and remasters and remakes and so on and so forth. But then you've got people who are kind of tired of it be of games being a open world co-op shooter, or a kind of over the shoulder action adventure. And I think the thing that I miss with Sony, and obviously there's 25 plus games are in the works and stuff, and some are kind of indie level and some are AAA and things like that.
Some third party related deals maybe.
Exactly. So the one thing I remembered, and I used to be kind of in awe of Sony when I first started, is that there was a huge diversity of really kind of risk-taking products. So you had, so I'm going back to kind of 94, 96, 94, 95, 96. So when Psygnosis were purchased by Sony, you had games like Destruction Derby, you had kind of Wipeout, you had Crazy Ivan, you had Lander, you had a G-Police, so you had a range of these games which were very kind of risky. So G-Police was this kind of futuristic helicopter game. Lander was a really awesome kind of revisit of the old 2D Lander, but with a really nice engine. You had Destruction Derby, which had amazing kind of damage physics. Crazy Ivan was a big mech. You had Microcosm. So you had a lot of these games which Sony were attracted to Psygnosis because they were seen as this kind of edgy publisher, edgy developer, and so on and so forth. And then the early days of kind of PlayStation, PS2, and so on and so forth.
One of my favorite gens.
Yeah, Sony were giving us kind of risky games, and I don't mean risky as in adult games and stuff like that, but kind of risky genres and trying new things. And I think that's what people really, that's what got people into kind of Sony, because Nintendo were in their kind of mold, or Sega were in their mold of these very specific type of games, but Sony were kind of I don't know if you remember the Wipeout advertising where the girl sat on the sofa and she's got blood coming out of her nose, and it's almost like she's had this kind of overdose or whatever. And it was this kind of that's what Wipeout's going to do to you. It's so fast, it's so kind of aggressive, it's obnoxious with great music. It's all of these things together, and that was kind of edgy. That was edgy Sony and stuff, kind of really pushing these games. So I'd like to see a little bit more of that. So I think, and this isn't me saying this is what Jim is doing, but if Jim is, so someone asked in the chat actually about Sean Layden, and I'm obviously not entirely sure, what happened. I know there was some type of falling out.
There's
and
a
then
lot
I
of
think
stuff.
there was,
Yeah, hearing a lot of things.
yeah, I think there was a payoff, and then I think he's on like a bit of a sabbatical, so that's why he's not really doing much in the market, because any executive kind of leaves, then there's a non-competitive clause and stuff like that. Yeah. So, but Sean was a gamer, and Sean was into his gaming and stuff like that. So, I think Sean was actually a better person to front, and I think Herman is more of a Sean than Jim is more of a Sean, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's yeah.
So, if Jim's kind of trying to play it safe and saying, Uncharted's a banger, so we'll try and release a kind of third-person action adventure. Last of Us, is a banger of a brand, so we'll do another story-driven action adventure. And starts to pick this kind of genre, which he knows is successful, makes huge amounts of money for PlayStation.
Yeah.
Then, for me, that would be quite sad because, excuse me, I think Herman is someone who will, take a like Guerrilla Games is someone who'll try something different. Killzone was Sony's kind of let's go for Halo, or let's go for
that was dubbed the Halo killer.
Yeah, let's create our kind of FPS and stuff. And it was great in some places, and other places kind of fell short a little bit. And obviously, I was involved in that, so that's me kind of criticizing our own product. But it was still a great game. I think it had great kind of FOV, and the point of view of the player and stuff was really quite unique in its day.
Yeah.
It was one of those first games that had kind of weight in weapons, and some people really liked it and other people didn't, because they were used to kind of Quake and stuff just being stuck, like the gun being stuck to the screen and stuff. So I think that would be a shame, and I hope kind of Herman can reintroduce with some of these 25 titles. I hope Herman reintroduces some more kind of risky or titles where we'll go, oh, that's PlayStation. That's PlayStation written all over it.
I think the pandemic's really affecting a lot of that, because usually Sony be hands-on at the events, and you get more personality with the reveals of these games. You know what I mean? Like with Sean, what I loved about Sean when he first started getting on stage, he was visibly nervous when he was first on when he's on there. But as you saw him progress, it's kind of like he grew with us, right? As the games got better and better, he got better and better on the stage, so to speak. And I had this this better presence on the screen, and just got better with it. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think Herman could kind of bring some of that back, but I'd rather than kind of move away from, we're getting these kind of blog updates off Herman, and I'd like people to see the more kind of human side to him, rather than reading a blog by him, if you know what I mean, and stuff like that. Yeah. And you make a good point. The pandemic has caused like a lot of issues, but obviously Matthias, who showed off like Horizon Forbidden West, he was my kind of principal designer.
Wow.
He's obviously game director now. I think he's moved up to. So
that's awesome.
He was almost kind of like the lead principal designer of the project on a whole. So he was looking after the multiplayer design team and so on and so forth. In terms of, so I was seconded from Liverpool with a load of other developers, and really we were kind of sent over to, Killzone had been in development for, I think, this is not me having a dig, but Killzone was in development probably longer than Sony wanted it to be. So, at that point, it started to burn money. Big team at Guerrilla and so on and so forth.
Developmental.
So they just put all hands to the pump and said, how much additional resource can we get on this project and get it out the door? And I went over because I had a pedigree in kind of Formula One and worked on on the Wipeout side of things and that. So I went over to kind of look at vehicle physics and vehicle combat in kind of like the tank sections, and how all the vehicles within the game drove, and you obviously had the Jeep and so on and so forth. So I was doing that side of things, but there was a team who were working on combat, a team who were working on the kind of multiplayer and so on and so forth. So Matthias is a great game designer, great director, and you've got Jan Bart on the who's now part of like looking after the studio, but he art director and so on and so forth. So all of this talent is there, and that's why Horizon Forbidden West looks so good. So it's one of those where Herman knows how to put together a team that make a great game or a great engine, and the guys behind Decima Engine, so that can be utilized as an asset now for Sony if they want to do console and PC game day and day, for example.
Yeah. Okay. It's a lot of people, again, we going into PS5 before we even got the reveal, a lot of people it's almost as if people were expecting like that PS2 to PS3 type of leap with these consoles versus the 4 and Xbox One X. I've been saying before for the longest, I'm expecting more refinements, and that's kind of what you're getting. Do you think that's like with PS4 with the facial animation? I mean, granted, I believe they're going to get better, right, with PS5 and Series X, but do you think we've actually reached a peak with consoles? Because I honestly think, unless we're really touching that crazy like build PC territory, we kind of reached that level, I think, personally.
Yeah, I think there's this kind of strange, like, crazy notion that people are expecting games to. Well, people are expecting the kind of real time,
right,
4K, Pixar, as your game or whatever, and what you've got to remember is like a Pixar movie takes years and years and years to kind of render and refine and so on and so forth. Yeah. So, and plus, it's a very specific art style, and I think the subjective thing that people kind of forget about is a lot of developers will choose an art style not because hardware isn't capable, but they've chosen an art style because they want that particular art style. So they may not want ultra realistic, or they may not want, they may want kind of a mixture of like semi-realistic and stylized and so on and so forth. So until someone comes out and says, what we want to do is we want to kind of try and create a simulation of real life. And I think the only game that we've probably seen at the moment is Ninja Theory with Project Mara. And that's not me saying that's kind of Xbox hardware doing that, because it's a VR game and it's rumored to be VR, PC, so on and so forth. But that's just a good example of it's a development studio going for, we want to create a game set in an apartment, and it's a real world apartment. Right. And if you watch some of those developer diaries, they've gone in and they've tried to build an engine and realize, how do we make a stainless steel sink look like a stainless steel sink, and how do we make all of these things? Because they've decided they want to kind of simulate a real world environment. So I think art direction's a big thing. I think what we will see with this kind of hardware, and I think people just kind of expected us to be playing, real time, real life, or real time Pixar or something like that.
Like everybody saw the Hellblade cinematic reveal and thought that was gameplay. I'm like, guys, not gameplay. That's an engine.
Yeah. So I think there's an expectation where people kind of expected a bit too much from the hardware, across the board. But I think the big game changer for me is going to be kind of like machine learning stuff, and kind of utilizing like machine learning, AI, those type of things to kind of improve and increase the speed of like gameplay, for example, game development, for example. So I'm not sure. Have you seen any of the? So it's not kind of directly game related, but Intel recently released something where it was kind of
Fidelity FX thing?
No, sorry. So what? Yeah, that's AMD. Yeah. So Intel released this kind of machine learning kind of project, and it was it was GTA 5, and what they did is they kind of had this machine learning tool to analyze kind of every frame as someone was driving around in GTA 5 and so on and so forth, and then utilize. I'll link you on Twitter, and then if anyone in chat wants to see it or has not seen it, then you can kind of tweet it out if you want, or I'll do the same. So what they did is they basically got this like catalog of hundreds of thousands of images in Germany, and they were kind of photos, almost like a Google a Google Maps car going around and taking pictures of Street View and so on and so forth. And they basically put that through a system, and they taught the system to say, when you see a tree in GTA 5, you replace that tree with this tree. And when you see a building, you do this treatment, so on and so forth. And it actually looks like dash cam footage. So GTA 5 looks like dash cam footage of someone putting a GoPro in a car and driving around in the real world.
Wow.
And it's kind of, and obviously there's a lot of processing power behind that.
Yeah.
But I think what machine learning and what these kind of, this artificial intelligence within games will allow us to, is it will almost allow an art team or something to block out a cityscape. So say someone in the future decided to build a kind of a GTA type game or open world game or something, they could almost block out the cityscape and use kind of lower fidelity models and not worry about textures and so on and so forth. And then you have these kind of machine learning elements to then say, let's texture the world, or let's make it look like this, and let's make it look like this, and so on and so forth. So I think those are the things which are going to kind of help transform games, or that type of things, ways in which kind of AI can truly learn how you as an individual play a game compared to me, and almost switch up the enemies and NPCs, and switch up so our kind of gameplay experiences are completely unique because the AI are not scripted, or they're not doing this, or they're not doing that, that side of things. So I think you're right in fidelity. I think all we're going to do is move towards 8K and so on and so forth, and that's not going to be for some time because
that's probably going to be the pro models at some points when they do this, because I'm pretty sure revisions are definitely going to happen in some capacity for 8K, even though I don't think they should push 8K. I really don't.
No, I think 8K gaming would be would almost, well, the only way 8K gaming would probably would work in this current gen, or PS5 Series X gen, is whether kind of DLSS or reconstruction or those type of things help reconstruct up to 8K.
Right.
I think if we wanted to do true native 8K, we're talking about the generation after this or the generation after that, for hardware to really improve.
Get ready to pay for it. That's one thing.
Yeah, and it's going to be expensive.
Yeah, and especially with the whole I don't know if you saw the AMD Fidelity X showcase.
Yeah.
That was another good thing. I made a video about. I was saying benefits consoles can get from this. Pushing higher frame rate. 'Cause that's kind of the line here, right? Like Series X is more of the beast, is built towards native resolutions, higher native resolutions. Versus Sony, where they went more so with just like performance. It's kind of like a blurred the line. That's why I always say it's like a blurred line, like 1800p up maybe to 4K, and they give you that that 60 FPS option on the system. But it's all about giving you the same result but for cheaper. That's why I kind of always pitch Sony on this side doing versus Xbox, because that was the big thing. Are they going to be more expensive? Is this going to be cheaper? And that was kind of the whole trick that I thought about it personally. And then when we saw the T-flop reveal, shout out to Dealer, because he was we was talking to him when it happened live, but he was like, "Hey, Big Cloud, did they reveal the T-flops?" I was like, "No," and he's like, he's in the chat, he's like, "Oh, it's 10." I'm like, "What?" And then it said 10.5, like 10.3. So yeah.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, kind of people try to attach themselves to like numbers, and really it's the experience. So if you look at Returnal or something, which is is ultimately natively rendering kind of 1080p or whatever, but it's being reconstructed in such a way that looks awesome. And I think you're right, Fidelity FX and DLSS and all of these kind of things where resolution reconstruction, machine learning and things like that. I think that's where we'll see the real kind of performance leaps when they get a grip of that in the tools. So when Sony do and when Xbox do and so on and so forth, then why wouldn't you choose a lower native resolution if you're reconstructing it to almost kind of indistinguishable 4K or to the naked eye or to the average gamer who's sitting 2.5 meters away from the telly or whatever the distance is. You can't tell, but what you're getting is 30-40% increase in performance, then I know which I'd rather. I always go for frames over resolution, unless like the resolutions,
Me and the same,
some of these
see?
back and
We go the
some of
same
these
for it.
back and pack games, you can tell if something's like a 900p or something crazy like
Very
that.
dated, the controls, the feel. Yeah.
But if it's a kind of a current game which has got a performance mode or a resolution mode, I go performance mode all day, because that smoothness, that fidelity of gameplay is much more appealing to me personally than a higher res with a lower frame cap.
Okay. Even though we kind of answered this, but he really wants to know this question. He says, what can a better CPU help with in terms of game design? Even though we kind of answered it, but you want to fill him in? What a better CPU
So I think,
can do?
I mean, it's just, it was a huge bottleneck in the last generation. So the reason the graphics, the graphics power of the previous generations were not actually that bad. So if you're targeting the correct resolution, etc., then those graphics cards and the graphics chipsets and stuff could cope with that. The thing that was bottlenecking everything was the CPU. The Jaguar cores was like really kind of
very outdated,
old school. It couldn't do kind of multiple instructions very well, and so on and so forth. It was really slower kind of IO throughput and so on and so forth. So the next gen or the current gen consoles now, where they've kind of coupled it with SSD, they've coupled it with a really kind of decent CPU. You've just got more. You've just got more options, really. So you've got improved throughput, you've got improved kind of visuals. You could do more with artificial intelligence and things like that. So you can rely much more on doing kind of multiple instructions, at once, rather than saying, actually, for us to work on this kind of really intensive section of a level, we need to kind of think, how do we get, how do we drop res, or how do we kind of, reduce fidelity or effects, or some of these things that'll take away from the visuals of a game. So it was always a compromise. It was always kind of balancing a ball. Whereas now, we've got separate kind of sound processors. We've got really decent CPU. So we've got in kind of really basic terms, we've got a really good kind of multicolored pencil, or pen with plenty of ink, and it can get what we want to see on screen really quickly. You've got a really decent kind of artist's brain who knows exactly how to draw every bit of finite detail.
Right.
And you've got IO throughput, which allows the artist to kind of draw faster than anyone else can draw and stuff like that. So you can start to get you can start to get your vision down with less compromises, really. And I think that's why really the CPU and the SSD is kind of the game changers of this console generation. And that's why we're seeing kind of blister and load times, and we're seeing all of these kind of things coupled together. I think where the problem comes in is when a developer's probably torn between kind of trying to push the resolution a little too high, or not being aggressive enough on kind of like a variable resolution, dynamic resolution. They need to be a bit more aggressive just to keep those frames up. And I think it's also early in the life cycle, so even though Sony have got great tools, and it's been a lot easier for developers to kind of adapt to the PlayStation tool set, because it iterates beautifully rather than kind of Xbox obviously went with a rewrite because they wanted to start supporting Game Pass on PC and so on and so forth. So there was a reason why they did that. You will, as we always do at the end of the generation, you will see the best games possible.
Okay.
At the end of the generation rather than now. So if Ratchet looks amazing, next week, which we all know it does. Then imagine what that team's doing, in 3 or 5 years' time, towards the end of the generation, when they absolutely know how to get every last little percent of performance out of the hardware.
Right. Like with the PS4, you thought the PS4, that's probably the max you're going to get to start, like with Uncharted 4 and then a few years later we got Detroit Become Human, and Detroit Become Human has some of the best facial animations, and then we got Last of Us 2. So exactly, you'll definitely get those improvements. The thing is too, though, I'm glad you mentioned the resolution. Like a lot of people focus more on that more so than performance, because like I remember I even asked this question. I was like, yo, can you tell the difference between 1800p and 4K? Can you tell the difference? Like, do you even know the difference? And one guy was like, oh, the difference between 1800p and 4K is shadow quality. And I'm like, that has nothing to do with the resolution, but that's just how people are on the internet. That's the wild part. So
yeah, and it kind of it boils down to a decent like display and stuff like that. So it's you only start to see like slight artifacting and things like that if a 4K telly is created to display in its prime, so at 4K. And a 4K telly may do 1440p, and it may do 1080p, and it may do 720, it may do kind of standard definition and all these things.
Right. That you
but
can
you drastically see you start to see some quality diminish.
Looks
but
blurred.
It's but it's with the kind of reconstruction methods and things now. Joe, half of the people who complained about kind of Returnal did not even know that Returnal was not a 4K or 1440p or whatever.
Yeah.
Until and this is the thing which always kind of bothers me, and it doesn't the kind of publications don't bother me. So I know the guys at like Eurogamer and Digital Foundry and stuff like that. So what they do doesn't bother me. So I just want to make that clear. I think what they do is great because there's a lot of people who want to understand the tech, and I think also developers kind of get a benefit from it when they look at stuff, and they've actively gone back to developers, and developers have improved things because of what they found. So I think what Digital Foundry do is great. I think what I don't like is when kind of fanboys and clout chasers, use those and say, and where it kind of falls down for me is you watch and you look on Twitter and see if any of these kind of clout chasers, mention resolution until Digital Foundry or someone mentions resolution. And the answer will be 100% no, because they don't know. And then someone points it out to them and someone's doing pixel counts and so on and so forth for a very interesting kind of technical deep dive, not for this console's better than this and so on and so forth.
Right, just a deep look, and it is like, like clockwork. Oh, the game is ugly. The game is not good. Yeah, exactly.
And that's it. And it's like Returnal looks superb, and then all of a sudden it was kind of the Craig type meme of the character, and it's for me it's you're not gonna so. Just as someone who's kind of got common sense and is sensible, let alone was a developer, you're not going to have the same high resolution facial model in a model that's a reflection. That's a do you know what I mean? We just there's no point in trying to have that reflection, pixel perfect to the kind of model that we see most of the time, because you're just giving away kind of dead performance on a reflection, which is part and parcel of kind of like a secondary element of the game. So then you have people who will zoom into trees or take a picture of that face and go, oh, look at the state of the face, and it's like, no, the actual face that we see time and time again throughout the game looks fantastic. The model looks great. The effects look great, so on and so forth. And it's just people who catch a screenshot at the right moment to go, oh, this looks terrible, or zoom into a tree or a brick. Or
on social media for Horizon, they're now saying Horizon doesn't look that great. I mean, I don't know what game they were looking at, but Horizon looked breathtaking from start to finish. But like it's cross-gen, so now it doesn't look that good, and they're saying God of War is not gonna look that good. It's like, I beg to differ.
I mean, God of War looks amazing on PS4 Pro. So this is one of the things is that a development studio is not suddenly just gonna, or a developer is not suddenly just gonna turn around and go, oh, we forgot how to make a game look great on previous generation hardware, which actually had some of the best looking games at the end of the generation because we absolutely know how to get every ounce of performance out of the hardware now. We understand it fully. We know exactly what techniques we need to use. And that's why God of War looks good. It's why Horizon, Zero Dawn look great. It's why all of these games look great on the previous gen. And people suddenly forget that and think, as I said earlier in the show, all of these games are going to have like potato mode, like on PC when people drag all the graphics down.
They don't look good at first, guys. You got to turn it up to make it look good on PC. Yeah. You have to do that. They always do that.
So we're not suddenly gonna have like games like that. But for me, what of the individuals who have not been able to get a PS5 and things like that? At least they can experience these games. And Guerrilla have got a bigger customer base to feedback on Forbidden West and say how great it was and stuff. And yet there are going to be compromises. There are going to be resolution turned down. There's going to be some effects pared back or whatever. But it's not going to look like an ugly game. And that's my problem is people are just kind of easy and quick to say, oh, that looks terrible now and this looks terrible and so on and so forth. And for me, half the time, these people aren't even playing games. So
that's... So you spitting right now. I've been saying that for the longest. They're not playing these games. They're not buying them day one. Half these dudes who complain like this, they're not buying them. And Twitter's their game. That's their number one game. Is Twitter. Exactly. They don't play the games. And I agree with you. It's really unfortunate. It really, really is. Let me see here. I had some good questions. Okay, so. This is from Harry White. Harry White said, how much of an issue do you think it is making God of War cross-generation? I'm a half answer. I don't even think it's an issue because they always build for the base before they go to the newer one. But I'll let Chris fill the rest of it.
No, I don't think it'll be an issue at all. I think, like I said at the start, or it may have been before we went live, a lot of these games that are coming out, will have started the development life cycle on previous gen hardware because you split off. You tend to split off midway through or towards a third into kind of your development cycle, and you start to think about what the next game is, and you start to kind of reuse assets in the engine and so on and so forth, and you start to kind of spin up what you're trying to work on. So, at the end of towards the end of the Killzone cycle, for example. So obviously I moved on after Killzone 2, and then there was another game and so on and so forth. But Guerrilla were working on kind of Horizon way before it was even announced or spoke about. Concept art, engine tests, so on and so forth. So these games will have started their kind of dev cycle on those kind of platforms. And they will be running well, and they will look great, and so on and so forth. Excuse me. And then they will be looking at ways in which they increase fidelity or increase the capability of the new hardware. So, Guerrilla could turn around and say, Forbidden West, we will introduce some ray tracing in the form of maybe lighting. It might not be reflections, or it could be reflections. It could be, ray trace shadows, lighting, you name it. They introduce some ray tracing effects because that's what they get with the hardware. We see a resolution increase, or we see a frame rate increase, and so on and so forth. Higher fidelity kind of smoke effects, you name it. They start to utilize the power of PS5, for example. And the same with God of War. But you still get a great experience on the kind of cross-generational hardware. So I genuinely don't think it's not going to be holding anything back on PS5. I think that's kind of an old narrative, which a lot of people said about kind of Series X and X, Series S and X, and it's why a lot of people were kind of happy that the kind of "we believe in generation" statement was originally made, because they thought, oh, we're going to get the best possible versions and so on and so forth. It's not going to be an issue. These are studios that have been used to building games on PS2, PS3, PS4, and so on. So they know what they're doing, and I think it just allows more people to play them, which is a good thing, I think.
Okay. My good friend Def Singer, of course, he has to ask this question because he's on Xbox basically. So immediately, Game Pass has to come up so faster. But he says, do you think PlayStation needs a Game Pass, like a competitor for Game Pass, at some point?
It's a weird. So I think at some point, I think Sony needs an alternative. Yeah, I think they need an alternative competitor, and not necessarily for what we're seeing now. So I said this on a couple of other podcasts. So what Xbox are doing at the moment is they are preparing a service for when we don't really need dedicated hardware anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So they're preparing a service for when, and it could be generation. I think there'll be kind of one more generation after this, and then I think we'll start to move. I think cloud gaming will get to a level where latency is, non-existent and so on and so forth. I think infrastructure will have caught up around, around the world, and we'll start to see kind of, more of the cloud gaming side of things.
That's more of a pipe dream, though. At least until Google Fiber is everywhere, I'd see that.
Yeah, and I think, and if you think about kind of what latency was like online for, streaming games, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, it was awful, and now it's kind of on a decent connection. You get decent latency. It's not the same as kind of dedicated hardware and stuff, but it will improve and start to get to that point. So I think what Xbox are doing is creating a future service where if console gaming does go down the route of kind of streaming, and whether that's in a decade or 2 decades time or decade and a half, and we start to kind of you buy a Samsung telly and Game Passes on that, and you buy an LG telly and Game Passes an app just like Netflix is, and so on and so forth. And actually, all you need to do is purchase a controller, or you almost kind of have a Apple TV style streaming box, and so on and so forth. I think what Xbox are doing is they're basically trying to be the Amazon of gaming, in a sense. So I know a lot of people have said the Netflix of gaming, but the reason I say Amazon of gaming is because Amazon were like a bookstore, then they kind of went into tech, and then you can order your groceries, you name it, you can kind of order those things through Amazon. And it's probably easier for some people to kind of say, the Netflix of gaming, or the Disney Plus or something. So they're basically filling Game Pass and the service with EAs, and I think Ubisoft will come to Game Pass, and you'll have more of these kind of third party, and it becomes a service full of content creators rather than games.
That makes sense,
it's full of games,
push indies,
but it's content creators in the same way as Disney's got Star Wars, it's got Marvel, it's got all of these, it's got all of this content to consume. So I think at some point Sony will have to kind of do their version of that, because if we do move into an era of dedicated hardware kind of starts to disappear, then Sony want their customers to be able to consume Sony entertainment and products, etc. I don't think they need it tomorrow. So I think there's a bit of a kind of time difference for it. So I think I like what Xbox are doing with Game Pass, so it allows people with lower budgets, and it allows also people with big budgets, but they just want to try a varied array of different games that they may not have picked up before. And I know we've got PlayStation Now and a kind of semi-alternate version where where customers are given things. But I think Sony have been very reluctant because they've always been in complete control of the kind of licensing costs, etc. So we look at kind of Sony charging for crossplay and things like that. Sony are very kind of, they want to hold on to those. Well, you're part of our premium platform, so you must pay for it, and so on and so forth. So I think they think that there's enough value in PlayStation to not kind of offer a service like that. But I think the reason why we will see something kick in, because remember when EA came out with EA Access?
Yeah.
Right back in the day, and Sony came out and made a big statement about we feel that EA Access doesn't give our customers value for money. They said some weird statements about value.
Weird statement, yeah.
And obviously Xbox said, okay, well, we'll have it. And then EA purposely wouldn't put it back on PlayStation then when PlayStation, after 12 or 18 months, PlayStation did an about turn and said, actually, EA Access is really more popular than we thought it was, and we'd like that service,
Yeah.
And then it was kind of, well, actually, no, we're going to let you sweat for a bit now. We're not going to kind of engage about it, and so on and so forth. And then, so I think that gives an indication of, and I think you summed it up quite well early on, where you said they like to kind of throw the counter punch, or they like to see what happens,
right,
and then
hold on and wait.
But I think sometimes that's at the detriment. So a lot of people lost out on quite a valuable asset in kind of EA Access. Could have actually seen an increased attach rate. You could have seen players say, "Oh, actually, I'm going to get a PlayStation now because I've got these great games that I can play, but I also get this catalog of games." So there's more. I get instant value for my kind of $300 or whatever. My PS4 or my PlayStation Pro was at the time. So I think we will see something. And I think they will have to respond to it, because if Xbox continue to grab the user base on Game Pass, I mean, they're already doing, what is it, like 200 million a month or something? If you look at kind of subscribers and things.
Yeah, and they're about to, I think they're at 25 probably million subscribers for Game Pass now, probably, give or take, right? Give or take right now. Because I was telling everybody, I think the answer to Game Pass from PlayStation has kind of always been in front of us. It just needs a revamp, and that's PlayStation Now. Switch it around, switch the algorithm. Like, for example, instead of streaming the games, you can now download and play every single one type of thing. Better, that type of stuff. That would actually be a better situation than going from scratch and then buying another, a platform or whatever to do this. Yeah, it makes sense to revamp it.
No, I agree with you, and I think they've got kind of enough of a brand in PlayStation Now to kind of upgrade it or reinvent it, as you just said. I don't think they need kind of a brand new name for anything or whatever. I think they should just increase the value added for kind of PlayStation Now.
Maybe like combine PS Plus with it, you think, as like a bundle thing in the future?
Yeah. And I think they will be exploring kind of all of these choices and decisions at the moment. And I think Sony will not be sat there. Sony will not have taken notice of the attach rate of Game Pass and what. The Game Pass is causing a bit of a problem for Sony. Well, it causes a problem for Sony when you start to see big third parties. So like Outriders going to Game Pass was massive.
Yeah.
Because in a weird kind of way, Outriders is. We were talking about this on a podcast earlier this week, but Outriders is almost kind of seen as an Xbox game now, and it's not. It's a multi-platform game.
Yeah.
But people kind of inadvertently attach it to Xbox because it was Game Pass. It went straight into Game Pass, and it had a huge number base on. And I think if rumors of kind of like Battlefield 6 or those type of games start to make it to Game Pass, then I think Sony then have kind of a bit of a problem, because what you're doing then is you're asking, and they're not going to have a problem, as in you're then asking your player base. So there was a bit of a challenging conversation around MLB The Show, as we all saw. So there was a bit of a narrative of, actually, Sony, you're asking us to pay $70 for this game, and people on Xbox are getting it for free on Game Pass, and it's not for Sony to turn around and give that game away to just because Xbox are doing it.
Right.
So Xbox will have paid for the privilege of that. But it created a narrative that was probably quite uncomfortable for Sony, because they as I say, they shouldn't have to give a game away for free because someone else is doing that.
And I'm glad you said it created a narrative, because that's why I think why they would actually really consider doing it now, because clearly people want it. People want a cheaper solution. Nobody wants to pay $70 for every game.
No.
That's the thing. And I said that was a big fear going into this generation. If you add an additional $10 on each game, typically what you're doing is you're putting a bigger magnifying glass on that said game. If that makes sense. they're looking at is it really worth the extra $10? Like, what does it do now versus this? And when you factor in last generation, where we got a lot of games that weren't really complete, if you get what I'm saying, like where you had to pay extra for the DLC for more content. That's and you're still kind of doing that still, even with $70, which is even more crazy at this point. Yeah,
and it's not it's not games have suddenly got more expensive to develop. I had a little bit of a problem with the $70 stuff for PS5 games or whatnot because they've not suddenly got more expensive to develop, but what happened, and I think you touched upon it earlier, is that Sony were kind of forced to sell hardware cheaper than they wanted to. So I honestly believe, and I'm quite certain for a number of reasons which I won't get into, but PS5 should have been more expensive than it was, and Microsoft forced their hand with the Series S and the Series X price point, which obviously meant that Sony didn't want to come out and be the kind of more expensive console, because we saw what happened with
$600
PlayStation 3 and stuff. So Sony have probably lost more on the hardware than they wanted to. So an easy way to do that is you could increase the cost of a game, because you get a bit more of a license fee on it, and so on and so forth. And it's obviously only until they get to the point where they're obviously looking at this revision now, so they're gonna shrink the chipset size. They're gonna get more kind of chips off a wafer, and so on and so forth.
Like the PS3. Remember the PS3, the original fat look? It was chrome silver.
Yeah,
and then you had like the silver plastic,
shiny plastic.
There you go. That's exactly what I was telling people. I was like, guys, it's going to happen, but it's probably going to be like cheaper plastic, and it's going to be lighter. And for the next one, because PS5 right now, it's not a light system. It's a pretty heavy system, and you got some heavy components.
And I said this on a podcast a few weeks ago. This isn't like a PS5 Pro, or it's not kind of a different looking PS5 or anything. The shell's going to look the same. Form factor's going to look the same. Yeah. They may utilize this time to say, Joe, is the fan efficient enough in? Could we have? And I don't mean a beefier fan, but they may look at a different fan supplier, or they may look at
more.
It just allows them to do a very kind of light internal revision. So they say, actually, we're lowering the size of the chipset, and it's obviously going to be less. It's going to use less energy. It's going to get less hot, and so on and so forth. So we can start to then say, does the current fan configuration work on a smaller chipset? Oh, actually, it does. It's much more efficient now because it's less heat, etc. Or do we keep the same fan setup, but do we just go with Delta, or do we just go with a different supplier who has a slightly more efficient version, or whatever? So they may do a slight little revision. I think what they'll do is they'll use the revision to try and sort out the kind of SSD issue.
I think so too, yeah.
So there is an SSD issue at the moment, and that's the reason why we're not seeing an SSD. And I think there's a problem with kind of like keeping that thing cool. So I'm not saying this is not me saying it's overheating or it's kind of burning the system or anything out, but to kind of get the sustained levels that the internal SSD is producing. People as PC gamers know that an SSD will get hot.
Very hot,
and you have to make sure that you've got airflow and cool.
On the Series X. And I was telling people about that too. These newer, higher grade ones, which Sony has to check to make sure they're compatible, they have heat sinks. You know what I mean? These are more higher grade ones, and they get pretty hot. these SSDs. So it's really a hiccup.
And I think and I think the problem is you've got that kind of little, you've got that little kind of containment area within the PS5, where the SSD sits.
Yeah, where you screw it to the board.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the areas which is just causing a bit of problem. When these new SSDs get really hot, I'm not sure whether cooling is getting in. Is efficient enough at the moment and stuff like that. So you may see a slight revision, in that regard, but we're not going to see
maybe memory
a different console. We're not just in how they kind of sit that, or that how they cool that. So that's what I'm talking about, like fan
Yeah.
cooling, because it almost sits in like a little chasm,
Like a little base, and it's like suffocated. Yeah.
Yeah. So you want to try and get a bit more airflow, and I think so. I think we may see a slight revision in just trying to cool or sort that kind of the issue out. I don't think it's a catastrophic issue,
Yeah.
but it's an issue nonetheless, and that's the reason why we haven't got expansion at the moment. But we're not going to see anything drastic. We're not going to see like a new look shell or a PlayStation 5 Pro or anything like that. This is just normal kind of hardware manufacturing process where they look at, let's get more chips off a wafer, let's reduce costs, let's reduce heat and energy and so on and so forth. And we've seen it, as you said, with previous consoles, PlayStation, so PS3, Slims, you name it.
Had all the SS, or not SD, they had all the memory card support. Remember, it had the little door, and then the revision, the door didn't open, and it was cheap plastic. It's basically going to be the same thing here, and hopefully more efficient in this case. That's because most of the crashing, especially in games like Returnal, I don't know if you've been noticing, like consoles crash midstream. It's mostly because of that, the SSD situation. But here's a good question for you. I know, obviously, eventually we're going to get to this point where we get a slim, not the Pro, but a slim version of this. Do you think they'll adopt the Series X style with the memory card, maybe?
I'm not sure, actually. I think it just depends on... It really depends on how they kind of, what situation they get to with the SSD. Do they end up having, a wide range of suppliers that can provide SSDs? I think Sony have always been quite clever in, kind of opening up a console if you need to. Remember we used to open the back up and install like a hard drive, a separate hard drive, and stuff in kind of like pre-hard drive generations and stuff. I remember like the PS2 had this kind of external bolt-on kind of hard drive that you screw in, and it kind of had this proprietary. So, like, I'm not sure really. I think, shrinking the size of the chipset allows them to obviously start to move towards,
smaller
being able to support kind of a slim and so on and so forth. Because as I say, heat reduction, power reduction, all of these things.
Yeah, that heat sink is is insane in the current build right now. Yeah. That's true.
Yeah, it's huge. So I just think I think Sony have always produced a good looking slim console. I think the slim models always look quite good, and it's always been a lot more efficient. It's been quieter and stuff like that. And I think so I think that this process of kind of shrinking down the chipset it'll just give them more options as they kind of move forward in the life cycle of the console.
Okay. Let me get this super chat here from Rob Jones. Shout out to Rob Jones. He says, "What's up, Chris? Fellow Scouser here."
Scouser
here. He said, "What game would you wish was at E3? Hope you're all good, mate. And Ryan, man, another great one-on-one. What game do you? So let's go ahead and move this over because we talk PlayStation. What's the E3? I know it's E3. We're getting close to E3. Is there any particular show that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to seeing anything new. So I'm looking forward to kind of any new stuff. There's a lot of things that we've kind of heard about and been announced and so on and so forth. So I know Sony will end up doing something post E3 or pre or as they normally do. So I think on the Sony side, I'd love to see, and this is just a personal one for me, I think I'd love to see kind of Wipeout brought back for PlayStation. So I think it's quite an iconic brand, and I think we've gone long enough now without a Wipeout game. And I think if you were going to kind of bring Wipeout back, I think like a PS5 version, so a proper next gen version would be the one. So if you just think about what some of those levels and what Wipeout will look like in HDR and I think it just look awesome. I think it lends itself. I think there's a whole bunch of gamers who've heard a lot about it and may not have played it, and I think there's a whole lot of gamers who'd love to play it again. I think if it was me, I'd be looking at maybe like Lucid, the team at Lucid who did Destruction AllStars. So there's a couple of ex-Sony Liverpool developers there and people who were involved in Wipeout. So it seems like a natural fit for them to do something with Sony again. So I'd like to see that. I think, Joe, across the board, I'm not sure. Obviously interested to see how kind of Halo's progressed.
Yeah, it really needs an upgrade.
Yeah, to just see where that's got to. I think for me, I just think stuff like, I think Compulsion are working on something kind of interesting. So I think it was kind of described as BioShock meets kind of Uncharted. So the Compulsion of the people who did We Happy Few, and I think We Happy Few's a great game. I think you can tell they kind of had a budget, but I think now, with the backing of Xbox and who they've got, it'll be interesting to see what they do. But for me, really, I'm just excited to see what a range of games are across, all of the consoles, really. And I'm more kind of excited about discovering new stuff that has not been announced yet. I think a lot of stuff that's been announced is nice, like Dying Light 2, and I think Far Cry 6 looks fun, I think obviously Horizon looks great. We know Ratchet and Clank next week is going to look phenomenal. So for me, I like kind of E3 being a kind of a surprise giver. I like sitting there and seeing something I've not seen, and it's the first time I'm seeing. So I'm just excited to see what comes out of it, and it's.
Just looking for
anything.
Looking to be wild. That's all. Yeah.
Yeah. Anything which is better than kind of last year's. We had like a summer of like really slow reveals.
Oh god,
and
it died down. It died down after like 2 days. I'm like, okay, this is not. This ain't it. Nah, this ain't it.
It's not the way to do it. So, but yeah, I'd certainly love to see a Wipeout come back on PlayStation.
I want those E3 2016 feels. I don't know about you, like Sony with the orchestra. I need that type of reveal type of thing from me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. What do you think from Insomniac? I know Insomniac, obviously, this is the month of Ratchet, and Insomniac's been tweeting a lot of Resistance, Sunset Overdrive. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think? I don't think it's going to be here, obviously, right? But future. Yeah. Do you think a remake of some sort, or maybe a part 4? A lot of people saying part 4. I've been saying remake the whole series for a while.
Yeah, I can see Sunset Overdrive coming back. So obviously, I think Xbox were quite fair to kind of give the IP back or whatever. I think it'd be remiss of kind of Sony not to utilize that. I think Sunset Overdrive is one of those games which is like awesome, but I think it would have thrived more as a PlayStation exclusive, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's not me knocking Xbox or anything or Insomnia. I just think it was almost kind of like a PlayStation game on Xbox. Is the way I saw it. So, and it's a cult classic, and obviously, so I think it would be. If I was Sony, I'd certainly be looking at doing Sunset Overdrive, sequel and bringing it back to PlayStation and say, look, let's let our fans experience that.
Hey, we got Sunset.
Yeah.
Okay. Like on my
just a little bit of friendly flex. There's nothing wrong with that. I think Resistance would be an interesting one, but I'm not sure whether I get the feeling. Someone like Insomniac, you would want to kind of give them free reign again. Let's see something new from you guys. We know exactly what they're capable of. We know they've got like a phenomenal engine. So yeah, I just think we should let Insomniac do what Insomniac do. But I think there would definitely be. I would definitely be playing around with the Sunset Overdrive sequel. That's for sure. If it was down to me.
Okay. I know you heard of the company D-Brand. Have you heard of them? D-Brand, custom. They sell like the custom shells for the PS5.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah.
Okay. You know what I'm thinking Sony's missing out really really bad here with like customization for the console. Like they're about to drop, or they just dropped the black and red DualSenses. And, a little convenient that they dropped those after their Let There Be Carnage trailer. And I'm like, it would be cool if we got a black, like a custom black PS5 shell. to go with because it's eventually going to happen, right? Spider-Man 2.
Yeah.
Black Suit is
yeah.
eventually going to make its debut. Do you think Sony's missing an opportunity with like these games, like giving you the option to really customize them, express them? I mean, they don't even have custom themes on PS5. Do you think that stuff needs to be there?
Yeah, I mean, I think they'd sell like hotcakes if they made custom shells. So I was talking about this on Joe with some mates and that about. Do you remember the 360 had these kind of face plates on the front?
Yeah, the little stickers, the green fire ones. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they kind of released like the plastic, and you kind of pull the plastic faceplate off, and you get like a Forza one or a Ghost Recon or whichever it was. And obviously, a lot of publishers and that used it as kind of PR, so they would send them out to kind of like reviewers and stuff. But I think there was something quite nice. People like to kind of customize the console and things, and I think Sony fans would scream out for it. They've got some great brands in like Spider-Man plates or any of these kind of God of War plates and stuff. And I think they would absolutely sell. And I think it gives PS5's been a bit polarizing for people, hasn't it? Because some people like kind of the white and black looking console. White, but then a lot of people have kind of I've looked at third parties to make that console kind of like all black or try different variants. But I think I can see it coming. Part of me just thinks the reason why they may not have done it is because they want to just kind of get the kind of supply and demand under control, and because I can see an element of the industry kind of saying, well, you can't supply consoles, but you're supplying plastic cases or so I think they may just be a little bit cautious about that, but I can certainly almost see there being some kind of special edition version, or you could see a God of War Ragnarok version coming out, when that game releases. Also, it's an opportunity, that's for sure. It just depends on how much it costs to kind of produce those things.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. It's a good point. Yeah, because they can't even guarantee you on PS5 right now, especially with these scalpers. Yeah. It's really out. They're overwhelmed right now. And a lot of people are saying, "Oh, the graphics cards, the new graphics cards." I'm like, guys, no, you're not getting.
You're not getting a new graphics card. But I think I saw a screenshot of when the 3080 Ti was announced, and there was one of the websites had 9,800 and something people waiting on the web page. So it's just ridiculous.
My guys, you're not gonna get these anytime soon. But people, exactly. They have hype. They have their little hopes, and I'm like, it's fun to dream, I guess you can say. But reality is often disappointing. That's when it comes to this type of stuff. That's what it is.
Well, I think we've moved into kind of a period now, haven't we? Where I think there's a genuine reason to buy kind of a pre-built PC just to take the graphics card or the CPU out of it, and then put it back in your own build or whatever. Yeah,
he spent like $3,000 just to get a 3090 or 3090, and I'm sitting there going, "There's no way in hell I am buying a whole new rig. I built my PC here on the right side of me. I built this. I'm like, there's no way I'm just going to do that." So I ended up getting lucky and securing a 3080. So.
Oh, nice.
we got lucky, but yeah, got lucky. But yeah, I agree though. It's a lot of hassle to get these things.
Yeah, we live in a crazy world where you can't kind of like you can't get hold of. Because I'm going through a bit of an issue at the moment, so I don't know if you saw, but kind of Fanatec are releasing a new direct drive steering wheel, the CSL-DD.
So you're really into like the simulator. You're really into that.
Yeah, so I like kind of sim racing and stuff. So I've been on like the mailing list and so on and so forth, and it's kind of I've missed like the first wave and so. And I was just saying to my mate before the show. It's kind of gone are the days, aren't they, where when something was released, you could just kind of buy it, and you just it's
nothing really sucks when you're ready to buy it. You got the cash and you can't buy it. That sucks. I hate that feeling. Yeah,
and it's just kind of like anything. It's whether it could be a mobile phone or it could be kind of AirPod Pros, or it could be an AirPod Maxes, you know, if you like those things, or it's just like anything where you think, oh, actually, I'd really like to get a new headphone or this or that, and you just can't. We live in an era where there's so small or so few stock that you're just subject to scalpers, aren't you? Scalpers will just sit there and bot the hell out of these products.
Yeah, we're at their mercy at this point, which is, whew, that's another conversation.
Yeah.
Man, let's see here. Oh, we're closing on a hour, Freddie. So I'm gonna ask you one last question, and we're gonna close this out. Your 5 favorite PlayStation games of all time. Doesn't matter what platform. It could be one for, you know, for 2 each. It don't matter. But what's your 5 favorites of all time?
So I think, tricky one. So I go way back, and I'd say so. I think Vice City is one of my.
Okay. We started off good.
It did. So it was a PS2 game, wasn't it, when it came out? PS2. So Vice City was awesome. I think, you know, great soundtrack. It had awesome. It had an awesome cast. I was a bit of a fan, and someone mentioned this. Yeah, the soundtrack was awesome. And then someone mentioned this actually in the chat. I'm not sure who it was earlier, but I was a big fan of you know, the Order 1886, was it? I remember Order 1880.
Oh, you like the Order 1886?
Yeah.
Wow, see, so Chris, we have a lot in common. I love that game. That game is very underrated. It's very underrated. It's a great game.
Yeah, so
okay, that's 2.
I'd like to see, Joe. I'd like to see a bit of that kind of, Joe, something resurrected with that. So I think that was a very underrated game. That's for sure. I think. So Wipeout was another one, because obviously Wipeout existed before I started.
Wipeout,
Psygnosis and Sony. So I worked on HD Fury, so there was a fair few Wipeouts before then. But obviously Wipeout was one of the things that got me into game development. It was one of those kind of awesome games that I wanted to play. I'm just thinking now, because there's so many kind of decent games. So I've gone way.
He worked on Killzone.
I've gone way back. Yeah. So I don't want to say I don't want to say any games that I've worked on. So I would think Spider-Man. The
PS4
previous PS4 Spider-Man was.
See, we got a lot of comments, sir. One of the best superhero games.
I absolutely loved. I think the gameplay in that was is kind of exquisite, really tight. Great looking game.
A lot of heart went into it. That's for sure.
So really, really, really good. And what's my last one?
Uncharted, maybe.
Tricky. Probably say the Last of Us 1.
There you go. That's all you
the
had to
first
say.
Last of Us. So I'd go as far as to say the opening kind of 20 minutes of The Last of Us.
Very
opening 25 minutes of The Last of Us is probably one of the best openings to any video game I've ever played. I think that experience was just kind of jaw to the floor. It was just kind of
the game went for the
one thing after another. It was just awesome. And I think if I was to ever say to someone, if they wanted to, actually, we were talking about getting into game design and development and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I would say kind of use the opening of The Last of Us almost as a piece to write about or understand, how storytelling in a game is given, pacing, how they kind of introduce little elements to it. So yeah, what a game. I think we'd not experienced anything like the opening of The Last of Us. I think it was how many emotions can you get out of one individual playing it. It was just
wow, this is
unbelievable.
intense. It's scary. Okay, that was kind of messed up. Then it's like, oh my God. And it just goes tragic. It's like, oh man, this is good. It's a really good game. Yeah. I didn't I like part 2. I just didn't like the third act of part 2. That's why I didn't like. Yeah. But a lot of people are picky on part 2. Like a lot of people like it. It's a very polarizing game to the masses. Part 2.
Yeah, and I think for me, I think any kind of medium, whether it's film or whether it's gaming or TV or something, I think there should be an element of kind of polarizing, for them being polarizing or conflict or whatnot. Because I think it's it's what makes these things interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true. That's very, very true. Well, guys, that is episode 155, man. I hope you guys have fun. I had a blast. Hit that like button if you haven't done so already. Make sure you guys follow Mr. Grannell on all platforms that he is located on. I know he's on Twitch. I said Twitter. He's on Twitter. He might be on Twitch. I'm gonna ask him, obviously, but
no, I'm not on Twitch.
Mr. Grannell, man, seriously, thank you so much for coming through. I know we had to reschedule a few times to get you on here, but it was a treat, man. I had a blast. I hope you had fun, and definitely would love to have you back on at some point in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Apologies. It took us a little while to kind of sort things out, but yeah, absolutely love being on. Been a privilege to be invited. Obviously, chat's been great, and yeah, if anyone wants to kind of message me, have a chat, any different questions or whatnot, then feel free. CJ Grannell on Twitter. And then, yeah, Joe, I'd be honored to come back on the show as well. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, absolutely. We'll probably, I don't know, we'll probably hit you back up after, I don't know, State of Play. If they do another State of Play, and we'll get your opinions on it. That'd be cool to get your opinion on it. All right. Absolutely. Guys, thank you guys again for coming through. Had a blast. Hope you guys enjoy your weekend. You guys already know, videos nonstop. I want to say a big thank you to all the new subscribers, our new channel member, obviously. We're getting closer to 10K. So thank you guys, man. We're getting close. We're getting closer and closer to the 10K milestone. Again, this channel is nothing without you guys and your support. And I appreciate you guys for always being there to support yours truly. Until next time, this is your boy Ryan, a.k.a. BitCloud Gaming. Of course, Mr. Grannell. We'll